What is up? Another week removed from the Super Bowl, another look at NFL free agency. We looked at the quarterbacks last week. Now we get into the running backs. And quarterbacks were kind of boring. Running backs are hella boring. But don't worry, we have a great guest. Yes, we have a guest. You don't just have to listen to me and Josh this week. It's going to be a great show as we break down the free agent running backs and their landing spots. Let's get into it. What is up? Welcome to No Punt Intended, presented by Club Fantasy. No Joe Zolo yet again this week, so it is me, Ryan Weisse, hosting. With me, as always, Josh Hudson. And Josh, we brought a friend along this time.
Yeah, thank you for bringing on a guest because my work schedule lately is kind of shitty, to be honest.
Yeah. I know it's bad when Josh is like, I don't have a guest. Can you reach out at like 9 o'clock, knowing damn well I'm a late or early go to bedder. I don't know what I'm looking for here. I go to bed hella early, folks. So I was like, yeah, I'll do it in the morning. And Andrew Hall, who writes with Fantasy Pros. I want to let you know how, Andrew, not that I don't follow you. And as I mentioned before the show, we're friends on Facebook, but I went to my Twitter feed and typed in free agency, and you had recently published a Dynasty article for Fantasy Pros. And so let me reach out to Andrew because I know he at least has a little bit of a pulse on NFL free agency. Welcome, buddy.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. And we were kind of talking about this too. Like, I don't think I've been on your show before. So this is terrific.
Exactly.
Glad to have a good podcast here with you. But yeah, free agency is a great time to start the speculation rosters and kind of start looking at things and making your dreams come true. So I'm happy to be here and talk about some running backs and free agency.
Yeah, we talked about the quarterbacks last week, and we always joke, like, we make these predictions and we know they're not going to come true, but we're fantasy football analysts. We know that half the shit
what else you got to do
come
right?
true.
Come on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're trying to have fun here. Exactly. Andrew rocking the Fantasy Care shirt. Shout out to Scott Fish and Fantasy Cares for taking down best fantasy industry business at FSGA just last night or earlier today. I don't remember which one it was, but regardless, shout out to our good friends over there.
That's why I wore it. I saw that news. I'm like, I got to wear this on my first podcast of 25. Like, let's get back into this and represent Fantasy Cares. I was like proud enough and lucky enough to help them last year with a lot of their FC eliminators. Awesome. So it's kind of nice to be part of the crew.
Well, I absolutely adore that. And I wish I'd have been smart and wore like a Scott Fishbowl shirt. I'm just out here rocking solid black. So
I got about a dozen of those. So that's this is different.
Yeah. you're just a flat out better professional than I am, Andrew. As I mentioned, quarterbacks last week, but Josh, let's kick this thing off with news and notes before we get into the running backs. And there was already a little bit of free agency ish. Andy Dalton re-signs with Carolina. Josh, I don't think either one of us predicted that last week. The Browns have released Nyheim Hines, so obviously we're going to be talking a lot about him on this free agent running back show. Josh, the Eagles have promoted passing game coordinator Kevin Patullo to offensive coordinator. I read an article that referred to him as Nick Sirianni's right-hand man, and now he is the officially offensive coordinator. And the salary cap was announced for the 2025 season, and like Josh pointed out last week, it could end up being higher than what anyone expected, and it was. It's the range of 277.5 could be as high as 281.5 million. Teams were budgeting as 265 to 275. So it's better than what even they expected, Josh. And that you have in the notes here is 22 million more than last year. So let's start there, Josh. Is that going to get more running backs paid? What are we looking at with this higher salary cap?
If there were better running backs available, yes. All this tells me is that offensive linemen and defensive players are going to get massively overpaid because teams have the budget for it now.
Andrew, I think this is a good time for you to just talk about your favorite team. We see the Ocho Cinco jersey in the background. You are a renowned Cincinnati Bengals fan. Where do you think Cincinnati's going to spend all this newfound wealth they have? Is this going to be the key to T. Higgins keeping the band together?
It doesn't hurt, but honestly, I've seen a lot of speculation. I think we all have for years about how the Bengals can't possibly do all this. They can't possibly afford to pay everybody, and they're going to have to let somebody go. And I've always called BS on that. I'm like, no, this is some bullshit. Like, they're going to figure this out. Like, there's no way that you get these guys together and it works as well as it does. And even the cheap penny pinching Mike Brown as like, nah, we'll let him walk. Like that just doesn't make logical sense. Now, obviously, the Bengals this year had a really odd up and down kind of season. Like a triple crown winner, like a gold medal kind of year, right? And went 9-8 and missed the playoffs because they just couldn't win in close games. And a lot of that was their defense. So I've seen a lot of speculation again about how they can't afford to keep everybody with this new massive contract they gave Joe Burrow. I think we can keep everybody and add some players. I think we can go into free agency and get some D tackles and nose tackles and linebackers. Like we can shore up our defense. I'm not afraid of this at all. And then when you get into the fact that the salary cap went up and we're kind of in that Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase window, this is the year that we needed it to go up the most. And I actually expected it to be closer to 280. I know I heard the estimates that were like 275. I'm like, nah, it's going to be north of that. We saw just record-breaking numbers all season, and TV obviously is where the money's made. Inflation's going up, contracts are going up. That means payments are going up. So, the Bengals are in a good spot this year to have to pay a lot of players when they have a lot of budget to do so.
No, I love that. I wish I remember who tweeted. Oh, go ahead, Josh.
I was going to say, I mean, you talk about Mike Brown and the Bengals figuring it out, and they did all these great things, yet it did not get them anywhere. So why would the front office suddenly say, oh, we had all this great offense, now let's spend more money on it when we, in theory, ultimately is going to bankrupt the defense? The offense can't do it by themselves. Why not reallocate some of those funds? You still have Chase, you still have Burrow. You draft a young wide receiver this year, next year, whatever it is, to kind of replicate some of that T. Higgins production and invest in the defense where, quite frankly, the better players in free agency are this year.
Yeah, and I think that's really the trick, though, is that there is a lot of good value on the defensive side of the ball. But I've seen some things. I've done I think it's the spot track where you can go in and do the manual, like you can kind of do it yourself. And I follow a lot of Bengals podcasts and people that know more than me about the Bengals and their history and all of that. And there was one that I think it was Jake Lisco and Joe Goodberry did like a 3-hour live stream where they did the entire Bengals offseason. And by the end of it, they were kind of saying things like, well, we have $26 million in cap space after we signed everybody we wanted. Like, what is everybody worried about? The sky's not falling. Like the numbers just don't pan out that way. Right. And they have more of a pulse than I do of what the team tends to do. They were looking at it too, like in usual, the contracts that the Bengals give out, like every 3 years are between like 1% and 5% more than the cap, kind of on average or something. Like they did all the numbers, they crunched it all down and they're like, we've got plenty of space. And so again, I think that everybody's kind of overblowing this and looking at it just from the lens of we can't spend all this money on offense. If you look at it outside of the quarterback, I think the Bengals were 5th least spent on all money and all together last year. Like I don't think people understand how cheap they went last year.
I remember at one point,
right?
Yeah, I remember at one point early in the preseason, they had the most cap space, I think, of any team for a period of time. So.
Yep. And there's a lot of good cap space we can cut. There's players that are on a roster that may not be there that are pretty big cap casualties in a sense. And one of those. Sam Hubbard, exactly. And I think, again, our defense struggled, I think, a lot of the way because we just didn't have anybody other than Trey to do anything with. I think we expected a lot more out of Hubbard. I think we expected more out of Pratt, although he did well. I don't think that we got what we were looking for there. I think our cornerbacks and everything else on defense just fell apart. And honestly, I don't know why. I don't know if it was Lou Anarumo's defense just kind of getting figured out. I don't know. I mean, again, there's so much speculation. But with the change of the defensive guard and the ability to spend money on defense as well as sign our guys, why not? Like, I don't know what's holding us back. So, I'm really looking forward to free agency this year. And I'm looking forward to being disappointed like usual as a Bengals fan. So that's just how it goes.
I'm good friends with a Bengals fan. I totally understand where you're coming from there. Selfishly, I just want to see more Andre Yoshivas on the field. So I don't care what happens as long as I see more Yoshi. I do want to give a quick shout out, Josh, before we move on. Our buddy Jay said he's just checking in before hitting the hay. My man has a new job. He has been working his ass off. We love you too, Jay. Hope you're having a good one. Josh, real quick before we move on, I would be remiss. I let the Bengals fan talk. Let me let the Eagles fan talk. Your new offensive coordinator is an extension of your head coach. Are you expecting anything major? How do you feel about it?
It makes me nervous because the last time they did this was the Brian Johnson experiment, and that worked out swimmingly. No, I mean, maybe this leads to a better passing offense, or at least a more frequently used passing offense, seeing as I was the pass game coordinator. But I just want some continuity for Jalen Hurts. He's had literally a different play caller every single year that he's been a starter. I mean, it's rough. it's rough for him. And even going back to college, I think Steichen was the only one that he had multiple years, and he only had him for 2 years before he got promoted to the Colts, right? Head coach. But Patullo he's familiar with, obviously he's worked very closely with him for, since he's been there. So hopefully it, works out. But at the end of the day, you're still expecting big things from a first-time play caller. And I'll say this, the same thing that I said heading into this year and the year before that. When you change coordinators, expect hiccups, expect speed bumps. Things do not go swimmingly right out of the gate. Look what happened. They started slow the first 4 games. They had a bye week. They took off all en route to a Super Bowl. Right?
Look what happened. You won a Super Bowl.
Right? I mean, at least I know that the defense is in good hands because Vic Fangio is that fucking dude. But Patullo is going to take a little bit of time. If he's smart and he ever finds himself in a rut, call a quarterback draw or hand it off to Saquon. Those fix all problems. So
it's not a bad backup. Like, it's not a bad safety net. I mean, both of those guys are just stellar. Yeah, no, I hear you.
Well, there we go, guys. That's the team talk in the news out of the way. Let's move on to the free agent running backs. If you tuned in last week, we'll break down the show the exact same way. We're going to start with the teams with running back questions. We got the Cleveland Browns. Jerome Ford is currently the only running back on roster, as we mentioned. Naheem Hines released today. The Las Vegas Raiders, the Zamir White experiment was a massive, massive bust. The Bears, Ben Johnson likes to have 2 running backs regardless, but he's also jettisoned DeAndre Swift previously when they were with Detroit, so we could see a shakeup in Chicago altogether. The Dallas Cowboys, Rico Dowdle is a free agent, and there's just no depth on that roster whatsoever. The Denver Broncos have Javonte Williams. He's a free agent. Do we trust any of these up-and-coming guys as a lead back? The Pittsburgh Steelers, Najee is a free agent, and Jalen Warren is a restricted free agent. So they're going to have to pay one or both of those guys if they want to keep them in-house. The Los Angeles Chargers have J.K. Dobbins, who from last year is now a free agent. The Vikings have Aaron Jones. I thought was a void year, if I remember correctly, Josh, and I thought I read in an article today they're extending their void date. So there may be something there, but we can talk about that later. Cam Akers was also there, also a free agent. The Chiefs are losing Kareem Hunt to free agency, and Hunt took a lot of carries away from Isaiah Pacheco as Pacheco was coming back from that injury. So they probably need someone to go with Pacheco. And then I added the 49ers to this list, Josh, because Mitchell is a free agent. Jordan Mason is a restricted free agent, and Christian McCaffrey clearly needs backups. So Andrew, when we look at this list of teams out of this list, or maybe it's someone who you don't see on this list, who do you expect to make the biggest splash in free agency?
Well, if you mean like which
when it comes to running backs,
like which team is going to make the biggest splash? Because I think that's really the differences are like which team versus which player, right? Like there are going to be a couple of players that make big splashes, but in my mind, if we're looking at the teams, I think it's the Cowboys. I think that, Jerry Jones, the owner manager, wears all the hats in Dallas, right? I think he's probably not a big fan of getting laughed at as much as he has been. I think it's getting kind of ridiculous in a way where he's kind of like, I got to make something happen. So I don't know if there's enough talent in free agency, but he might do one of those things which he's done before is kind of like sign 2 or 3 of the top guys. And just like go out and get a bunch of guys that then gets him in the news and all of that, or pretty much leaks that they're drafting Genty, and that's kind of their whole thing, right? So like I think either way, I just feel like the Cowboys are going to be the biggest splash because that's just kind of what they do.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way I was leaning as well, Josh. Were you going there as the division rival, or did you have somebody else in mind?
No, I think it's going to be the Raiders just because they have the most money to spend. And now they just got 22 million more to spend. So, I mean, they're going to be pushing 100 million in available cap space. I mean, obviously Pete Carroll coming in, they're going to remake that defense. They're going to do a lot on the secondary, but they need to go get a quarterback. Maybe that's Sam Darnold. Maybe it's, Russ. I had Russ going to Vegas in our quarterback show last week. So if that's the case, they've got plenty of money to spend. Maybe they shell out for Najee Harris. I think they bring in Javonte Williams. I've been saying that for a few weeks. I mean, I just think really at the end of the day, they need more than just one, right? Zamir White couldn't hack it. Amir Abdul is like 85. Like he's got to be the oldest running back in free agency right now. And then Dylan Lobb couldn't even see the field. So, I mean, really, they have nothing at running back. And we know how much Pete Carroll relies on one running back.
Yeah.
Not only that,
Well, except for when it
running
matters.
back that breaks a ton of shots.
I just except for when it matters, because like that, that's just
Yeah, right.
4th and 1.
Too easy. Sorry,
Exactly.
you set it up. I gotta
go. Yeah. So, and that's really the thing is like, I mean, Browns need a running back, sure. With what money? They have none.
Yeah.
The Bears just signed DeAndre Swift. So for them to really make a splash, they're going to have to, either trade him, cut him, whatever. Cowboys don't have a ton of money. And again, like, I just don't see any running back here being like, hey, this is going to be my next, like, big, Emmitt Smith, Zeke Elliott in his prime, whatever it's going to be, right? The Chargers have a ton of money as well. They're very much more like a draft and develop kind of team because they know how effective their rush scheme is, that they can, I mean, shit, J.K. Dobbins off of 15 injuries comes in and rushes for almost 1,000 yards, right? Yeah. So they can make anything work there. The Vikings are going to be very strategic with their money. I think they hit a home run last year with Aaron Jones that I think they ultimately kind of bring back the gang kind of thing. 49ers they're still in CMC's pocket. Like they can't really do much outside of just get depth. And I think that's going to come from the draft. So
yeah, Andrew, I wrote in my notes immediately, probably Dallas, but I wanted to go another route with this. And I wanted to go with a team, not so much a team, but a new head coach that Josh kind of touched on that we've seen make splashes at running back kind of numerous times. They went out and got Jahmyr Gibbs and immediately got rid of DeAndre Swift with Ben Johnson. They went out and added David Montgomery, which just didn't feel like a move that made a ton of sense, but it certainly made a ton of sense for the Detroit Lions. So I think we're going to see something out of Chicago. I think Chicago is one of those teams that if they believe they can contend, they got this rookie quarterback. They have DJ Moore locked up. They have a rookie wide receiver on a rookie contract. I think this is the time, if you're going to spend on running back, this is probably the year to do it. And they're the team I could see wanting to do something interesting for their new offensive-minded head coach. I wanted to ask both of you, and I'll start with you, Andrew. This is not on the show sheet. I apologize. I just do this sometimes. With what we saw last year, with almost all of these backs getting 1-year deals and a lot of them doing pretty well with them, J.K. Dobbins comes to mind. Do we think maybe we start to see a couple more 2- and 3-year deals a la Josh Jacobs this offseason? Or do you think a lot of these guys come in on 1 year, or a lot of these teams, rather, since we're focusing on the teams right now, are going to just throw out 1-year deals to these guys? So,
yeah, I think what you're going to see is anybody with an injury history at all is going to get a 1-year prove it deal. And I think that's just the way it's going to be going forward. I just don't think that you're going to see teams willing to, really put a lot of chips in one basket and kind of run the risk. And that's why I honestly think J.K. Dobbins goes back to LA. I think that Aaron Jones goes back to Minnesota. Like, I think a lot of these guys just go back to where they were, and whether it's a 1 or 2 year deal, something like that, I think that's probably how it works out. Yeah. But I mean, you were talking about the Bears, and I wrote actually my article for Fantasy Pros mentioned specifically the Bears and DeAndre Swift, because I think that there is a world where Ben Johnson lands there. And as much as he enjoyed Gibbs and got rid of Swift, in a sense that we don't know that was him. I don't anyway. I don't know for sure that was his decision. It could have been a GM decision. It could have been a, talent scout. It could have been Dan Campbell that was like, let's go crazy and get Gibbs way high in the draft, which made no sense. Right. So I think there's a world where he lands in Chicago and kind of is still taking a little bit of time to get his feet under him. And I think, again, like most NFL teams are kind of built like dynasty, running back's probably the last position you get. And if anybody watched the Bears this season, you saw that offensive line was terrible. Their defense was terrible. Like, they have so many holes. I don't see them making a splash with running back, with DeAndre Swift being able this year under contract to do what Ben Johnson needs him to do. So I feel like there's a lot more for them to do there. And I think he's just going to stick with what they've got on the offense because it's working, and he has a lot to address as a new head coach. So, I mean, again, I think there's a chance that the Bears are a fun splash. And they add another running back, but I don't think it's going to be one of those top guys. Yeah. And that's where you start to see those 1 or 2 year deals come even more into play. Exactly. Because you got guys like Cam Akers. I'm not signing Cam Akers to a 3-year deal. Like, what, are you crazy? It's Cam Akers. I'm not signing Kareem Hunt to a 3-year deal. You know what I mean? Like, we just don't see that in those older kind of backup running backs. Yeah. Amir Abdullah not getting a 3-year deal, right? Like, that's just not that vibe. So I think we see a lot of 1-year deals. And again, I think the Bears are someone I wouldn't be shocked at all if you see like Zamir White land with the Bears, something like, let's just put another running back in there and make it messy for everyone. That's kind of how they go these days.
I love that theory, because you look at, Ben Johnson coming over, they're clearly invested in him. Like, they're going to give him time to make this work. Like, when Detroit landed Jahmyr Gibbs, they'd already started to shape this offense, right? They went out, they signed David Montgomery. They knew what they had with Amon-Ra St. Brown. You know, you add Sam Laporta after, you know, trading TJ Hawkinson. Like, they had already formed what this offense was going to look like. And they said, hey, the missing piece to really unlocking this offense, an electric running game, right? Ben Johnson's going to find his pieces. He's going to see who on this team fits within the offense that he's going to build around Caleb Williams. And I think that's going to be the biggest thing. And I talked about it last week, is that he's going to shape this offense around what Caleb Williams does well. Exactly. So ultimately, in, you know, whether it's later this year in free agency, next year, whatever it is, they're going to find a running back that's going to be able to work within this system that he's going to craft around Caleb Williams. Maybe that player is already on the roster now, but maybe they're not.
Well, I think another interesting, real quick to add one more piece. I want to make sure that we're clear on this, because this is something that I even now had to double check that I was right, because I thought my brain kind of overthought it. They drafted Gibbs on day one and then traded Swift on day 2.
The next day.
So so there is a world where it's not like they hated Swift and got rid of him and then went into the draft with Gibbs in mind. Yeah. They felt like Gibbs was not going to be there. He was there, that and then made Swift expendable, because in my mind, and I don't think anybody's going to argue this, Gibbs is better than Swift. Yes. Who out there right now is better than Swift on the free agency market when Swift is already signed? Yeah. Like, I just don't see that happening unless, again, they get something like a Genty or something like, and we see it duplicate itself again. But I don't even know if that was Ben Johnson's decision or if he was just sitting at home going, we got Gibbs. Oh, that's fun. You know what I mean? Like, that's kind of cool. And then they're like, oh, we're getting rid of Swift. Like, well, that makes sense. Like, I don't know if he had any pull in that, right? Yeah. That's an easy dot to connect. But I mean, again, like you were saying, Josh, there's a lot of stuff we don't know. And there's a lot of question marks on that Bears offense. And it could just be they're focusing on Caleb, and the running back is the running back, and it doesn't matter who it is.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, Swift, if he's traded before June 1st, he only has like a $2.4 million debt.
Yeah, I was looking
like Dave's $6.6 million.
There aren't a lot of
running backs made up anyway. I rarely worry about the cap anymore. The Saints have proven it's all imaginary numbers. So
and
I really
there's
don't
just
care.
Not a lot of running backs with big hits anymore. It's just the nature of the deals. One name I'll throw out there, not on this list, but you guys got me pulled off of this Bears thing. You want to talk about a small splash? The Detroit Lions kept Craig Reynolds around forever. And I would not be surprised if Ben Johnson's like, go get me Craig Reynolds to pair with DeAndre Swift. I like Craig Reynolds.
Guy, right?
I watched him play a couple of times. As someone who always has David Montgomery on his roster, I have to have Craig Reynolds as my very priority free agent. Guys, moving off of the real life landing spots, Josh, looking at these teams, those teams we mentioned for the RB needy teams, what would you say is the best fantasy landing spot? Where would you like to see the best running back go? And we're going to talk about where we think people are going to end up later, but regardless of who you think is going to end up there, which of these situations do you think is best for fantasy heading into 2025?
I think most people would tell you the Cowboys, and I would laugh in their face.
Yeah, I hope we're not setting Andrew up here. I hope we're not stealing Andrew's answer because I agree completely. It is not the Cowboys because we had that
Chargers and it's not close.
I'd say we had that big hype on the Cowboys last year, Josh, and we all should have just backed off of that. But now I'll let you finish.
Because everybody remembers, oh, Dallas, they have a good offensive line. No, they fucking don't. Their offensive line's with dog shit. They're hurt. Yeah. They have a couple decent pieces. That's what they need to get back to building. If they rebuild that offensive line, then you can drop any running back behind that offensive line and they're going to look like Zeke or Emmitt Smith, right? But that's just not the case right now. The Chargers have a quality offensive line. Joe Alt's a dog. That dude is awesome.
Yeah.
Rashawn Slater, dog. Like, they've got pieces on this offensive line and they have a great rushing scheme with Greg Roman. Pick any one of these rookies that are coming out, drop them behind that offensive line, and you've got a top 10 running back in fantasy.
There you go. And Andrew, it sounds like you just agree with that as the landing spot.
I do. Yeah. And that's kind of where I was trying to go before. Like, well, which team is going to make the most splash? I think it's Dallas, but I don't want whoever they splash with. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not excited about whoever they decide to overpay.
Yeah.
I think I'm right there with you though. The Chargers just see all the line, all the stars align for that being like whoever goes there is going to be a stud. And again, I think that's why they stick with Dobbins. I just don't think that they didn't hate Dobbins. He actually did well down the stretch. Like, he stayed healthy. He was able to, not very healthy, but he was at least palatable for the most part and got through that offense pretty well. I didn't love him, but again, I'm looking at this list and I don't know if you see something like a Javonte Williams fitting too much in there. Just my opinion.
Yeah.
I think Javonte could be a great fit in a lot of places, but again, I want to see it happen and then start to speculate on what it means before we even speculate on what happens. That's just the way I do things here. So
yeah. Well, Andrew, you're setting up the I don't want to call it a spoiler. You're setting up the end of the show because Josh and I, you weren't even in the room yet. We're talking like we think a lot of these guys are going to end up right back where they were last year.
I do too.
So
Yeah, I do too. I really do.
The
on
end
1 year
show,
deals.
Yeah. The end of the show might be the most boring end of the show, but that's okay. Let's talk about the backs. So we talked about where they were going. Now let's talk about who's going to be out there. So Josh broke this down into categories for me. When we're looking at guys who are presumed starters wherever they end up, or at least they were starters last year, we have Najee Harris, Aaron Jones, Javonte Williams, Rico Dowdle, and J.K. Dobbins. Then the guys who were depth pieces last year, Cam Akers, Jordan Mason, who is a restricted free agent, Jalen Warren, who is also a restricted free agent, Alexander Madison, Kenneth Gainwell, Dario Gumbuale, and Khalil Herbert, who spent a little time with your Bengals there, Andrew.
Right.
The older guys, Nick Chubb, Raheem Mostert, who was just released from Miami, Kareem Hunt coming off of a nice little run for the Chiefs again, Samaje Perine coming off of a terrible run for the Chiefs after Kareem Hunt got there, and Amir Abdullah, who Josh has anointed to be 83 years old and the oldest free agent running back known to man. And then Josh just called this category. Josh called this category Remember Them. And that's AJ Dillon, Elijah Mitchell, and Jeff Wilson Jr., who are going to be out there for some teams.
AJ Dillon was supposed to be the guy.
I thought it was incredible when he ended up back in Green Bay before even getting hurt. I was shocked after they go out and get Jacobs. They draft Marshawn Lloyd. Now, they hadn't drafted Lloyd at this point, but Dillon ends up back in Green Bay. That was super strange. And then let's break down just a couple of the last guys. Potential trades. You got Travis Etienne, Alvin Kamara. Are these teams that might be looking to move, especially with the Saints being in the position they're in? And then when we look at the previous draft, these are the running backs who are up for extensions right now. And it's a lot of really big names. Breece Hall, Kenneth Walker, James Cook, Rachaad White, Brian Robinson, Tyler Algier, Kyron Williams, Jerome Ford, and Isaiah Pacheco. So when you look this entire thing over, you are looking at the guys who are ready for an extension, some guys who are going to be traded, but a lot of free agents. So starting on this list, Andrew, let's start with the free agents. Of these guys, who do you think is going to command the biggest deal? We talked about maybe the Raiders or the Cowboys spend the most money. Do you think it's one of these guys? Who's going to get the biggest deal?
Well, I mean, if I had to pick today who is going to get the biggest deal and not have to say what size that deal is, because again, I think that's another question that I don't even think I could get into because honestly, looking at this list, you mentioned before there's a lot of running backs in free agency. I would agree, but I don't know if there's any studs. I don't know if there's anybody that really warrants what I would consider a long-term deal. Like, I don't think there's a bell of the ball here. I think Aaron Jones is probably the one that gets the best contract if he is that, void and kind of on the move and all of this. I think there is a world where they just stay and he isn't a free agent. So if he stays and isn't considered a free agent, my backup answer would be Najee Harris just kind of by default. But I don't see anybody giving him like a 2-year, $22 million deal or some bonkersville thing. Like, that's just not a thing that happens anymore. So, I mean, again, I think between those two that are what I would consider top of the line starters, Williams, Dowdle, and Dobbins all kind of frighten me. I mean, Javonte, I like the talent, but we haven't had a chance to see it. Rico Dowdle, and then J.K. Dobbins, like we kind of talked about him already. Like, there's some love there, but can he do it a whole season, let alone 2? I don't know. So, yeah, it's a messy year at running back.
I was crunching some info for the show today and was looking at other sites list for free agent running backs, and Pete Prisco over at CBS has Rico Dowdle as his number 1 ranked running back in this free agent class. And I cannot remember. Damian Harris was on the show and he's like, well, I would first of all ask Pete what the hell he was thinking putting him at 1. So Damian Harris just gave it to him live on air. Prisco was not on the show. But anyway, Josh, who do you think makes the biggest splash as we all laugh at Rico Dowdle's expense?
Well, I think the biggest splash comes from an extension. But if we're talking just the available free agents, I think Najee will ultimately get the highest value just because, again, 1,000 yards every single season. He's a former first-round pick. Teams will pay for that because their agents will work the magic to do that. But I think it's probably going to be close and similar to what Derrick Henry got. Basically 2 years, $16 million. So it's like $8 million a year. which I think with the inflated salary cap, that's not a bad contract by any means. And he's, people forget Najee was an older rookie. So he's really not young heading into his second contract. He's going to be 28 going into this season. So
27.
27?
Yeah, he turns 27 next month.
Okay, so well, still, I mean, that's most
he's not 20,
running backs that are.
It's a year, bro.
Whatever. That's enough, right? But no, regardless. So but again, he's only 4 years into the league, right? And he's had over 250 carries, I believe, every single season. There's a lot of wear and tear on Najee, and he's played every single game. So I think that there's going to be some teams that will value that level of health, especially at a position where you don't see that. And again, that's why I kind of think when you factor in age, wear and tear, I don't think he really gets more than a 2-year deal. I think a 3-year deal, maybe, just kind of depending. But I think you're probably looking about that $8 million a year range. And again, I don't think there's a single running back that is free agent eligible that will get bigger than that. Now, if we're talking extensions, that's a different story.
Yeah. It's a good show and a show that Josh is going to hate when we all agree, but I also had Najee in my notes as well. And Andrew, full disclosure, I said Aaron Jones, but I think he re-signs as well.
Yeah.
But I think it also just speaks again, guys. I don't mean to just shit on the topic of the show. It speaks to this class of running backs and free agency that everything's kind of predictable. And Josh, I'm giving you a hard time, but like I said, yeah, Najee still 27. They're certainly not giving him more than a 2-year deal. It just doesn't make sense when running backs die at 30. The one I feel worse for, and you guys kind of touched on this, and Josh, your eyes got real big when Andrew accused J.K. Dobbins of being healthy towards the end of the year. If Dobbins could have not missed games, Dobbins would have got the biggest deal of all these people to stay with the Chargers.
Let's stop and look at this for a second. Dobbins tailed off bad towards the end of the year.
That's true.
He did not have a 100-yard game after week 2. His season was buoyed by touchdowns. And you look at his season, it's almost a mirror image to his rookie year. We basically hit his ceiling already.
Yeah, I mean, he was still hyper efficient pretty much the entire time. The carries also went down. His worst game at the end of the season, 3.5, 3.3 yards. He had that 2.9. Was week 7. I don't know. When I look at Dobbins, I think he did the things we expect J.K. Dobbins to do. But what I will say is he also proved his not being durable, and no one's going to give him. And he's actually the exact same age as Najee Harris, which is hilarious because it feels like J.K. Dobbins has been around forever. And as we talked about, Najee Harris is not in that situation.
When I was talking durable, I was saying he was in the game. I wasn't saying he was good.
Yeah.
But I mean, again, week 17, 19 carries and 1 catch on 1 target, right? Week 18 carries. That's 3 targets. That's to me, they're using him and they don't distrust him. He was hurt, but honestly, running backs get hurt. We see that every year. I'm not really that worried about Dobbins. Yes, I understand he only had the 1 or 2, technically 100-yard games, but after that, it was kind of like nothing. I still feel like he's getting used by that offense. They liked him. He came back. They weren't afraid to use him. That's what I'm looking for. And that's kind of what I mean, by down the stretch. He wasn't great. He wasn't a game breaker, but the team leaned on him, and I don't think they'll let him walk.
Yeah. Fun fact about J.K. Dobbins, he's played exactly 1 game where Greg Roman was not the offensive play caller.
Really?
Yeah, because of all the time he missed in Baltimore.
Well, no, not even that. The only year that he didn't have Greg Roman was 2023. Was the year he missed?
Yeah.
No, was 2023. That was Todd Monken's first year in Baltimore.
Right.
And he only played the first game that year.
Yeah. That's the year he missed, right? Like I was saying, he was out the whole year. Yeah. That's crazy. I didn't think of that.
The same thing. Yeah, that is. He is very
we
much.
We all love J.K. Dobbins.
Well, no, he missed all of 2021.
Yeah.
Right. True.
Yeah.
But it's which year did he miss? Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, that's right. Not too many. We can talk about multiple full year injuries. Josh, I changed your wording on this question a little bit because you asked how many, and when I looked at this class, I don't think how many is the question. That's so fair. I know it's just because you were using a lot of the wording from last week. So Josh, I'll start with you here. Can any of these running backs change teams and become a top 12 fantasy option?
I think Javonte. Yeah. And again, it just boils down to kind of depending on the system. And again, I have him pegged for the Raiders. I think that's where he lands. It gives them 2 games against Denver to be like, hey, fuck you guys for not giving me any fucking carries. But when you look at his play style, it really does line up so much with what Pete Carroll did with Marshawn Lynch. And the moment that Lynch got to Seattle with Pete Carroll, it really, you look at outside of the injury, Javonte's career arc looks very similar to the first 4 years of Marshawn Lynch, like forced missed tackles, all those like efficiency, all that kind of stuff. And then he lands in a system where they're going to use him, they're going to run him. And what does Chip Kelly want to do? He wants to run the football. He wants to, grind it out, right? Javonte Williams can be that guy. I mean, look at DeMarco Murray in Philly with Chip Kelly, Ryan Matthews. Like, those are very similar type of running backs. I think that to me is setting up for a 250 carry, 4.3 yards per carry. But Javonte has over 50 targets in 3 of 4 seasons. Like, the only season he didn't hit that was when he played 4 games because he tore his ACL. Like,
he had 22 in those 4 games. He was a beast in those 4 games. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, he's a pass catching merchant, and you factor that in with a high end workload in that kind of a system. I think that there's room for that level of, hey, that's top 12 guy right there, especially one that wouldn't be drafted as such.
Yep. Definitely won't be drafted as such. I hope you're right. I've always liked Javonte. I don't know if I see that one. How about you, Andrew?
I like Javonte, and I think that was going to be my answer for like the most upside. Like, if you're just taking a moonshot here and you're like, well, which one of these I think has the most tread on the tires, which everybody says, right? Like, which one of these hasn't been utilized enough? And I think we all saw that in Denver last year. He had a couple of good runs, but it felt like they didn't really like him. I don't know how else to say it.
Like, 2 attempts per game.
They were begging.
Ugly.
They were begging Audric Estime to take that job.
And I mean, I was looking at his stats here. Javonte, the worst game of his season where he maxed out at -2 yards was against the Raiders. And so 8 carries for -2 yards. And if he goes to the Raiders, that would be a fun little, he literally helped the Raiders that day too. You know what I mean? Yeah. So it's kind of ironic, but I like your idea too of him going to the Raiders. And the more I think about it, like, that would be a really good fit for everybody involved. And I think if they lean on him as the only guy, and that's ultimately what matters the most, right? If the only way to be a top 12 in my mind at this point is to be the 1A and the 1B. And I think Javonte's probably got the clearest path to doing that because he doesn't have as much of an injury history. He has some. I think he's got the most motor. I'm trying to think of, what am I thinking of? He's got the most drive to do it. I feel like he's been kind of misused and undersold. I think Rico Dowdle's got some of that too, but I think wherever he goes, he's going to be a complementary piece, which means his upside is limited. And the other guys we've already talked about, I think that some of them could demand good contracts, but they're not going to get solo jobs, I don't think. So Javonte's the one for me as well. If you want to go deeper though, which I think is always kind of fun, I think there's a world where Jaylen Warren stays in Pittsburgh and becomes a guy there too. Because if they let Najee go and they end up as a restricted free agent with Jaylen Warren, he stays there and they don't get anyone else. That's a world that could happen. And that could put Jaylen Warren in the 1A, 1B kind of conversation all on his own. But he doesn't change teams to become that. So that doesn't really answer your specific question. But I do think he could stay where he's at in a sense and still be a top 12 if that ends up panning out. But again, we're just talking upside here.
No, I think that's a great call out on Warren. I brought that up on a show. I think it was one of our very early mock drafts, Josh, where I brought up that Warren staying in Pittsburgh if Najee's gone is a very interesting topic. I'm just going to quickly throw in Najee, when he was used in the passing game as a rookie, was a top 5 running back. So if we're asking which one of these guys could change teams, if Najee goes somewhere where they'll throw him the fucking football, Najee Harris could be a top 5 running back, and we've seen him do it, and that was with fewer than 4 yards per carry. So,
and he's had 4 years of not missing a game and 1,000 yards each season, right? Like, so he's got a lot of use on that body, but at the same time, he is held up very well for running backs. And again, I think you mentioned it, right? He's 26. He just turned 26, or
no,
March 9th, he turns 27.
Yeah,
Sorry, I'm a little off. So he's about to be 27. He could get one of those 2 or 3 year deals we were talking about before with a new team. But again, anytime you change something like that, that could be devastating for a running back of his type. He's now having to do a different offseason routine. Maybe he
Yeah.
I hate to say it, but like maybe he pulls a muscle or something, knocking on wood. So I'm not trying to risk for that. But like there is a lot of change that comes with that. And that could be detrimental in my mind, that limits his upside. But I do love the player. I've always been a fan of Najee.
Here's an idea. Maybe Ben Johnson looks at Najee and says, hey, you could be my David Montgomery.
Yeah.
I'll be honest. The thought crossed my mind when you guys were telling me that the Bears couldn't afford it. And I'm like, oh man, if they could, he fits a role.
Well, I mean, they could definitely afford it. They've got salary.
Well, let me be clear.
Just need to reallocate that.
Afforded. I was just going to say afforded is not the right word.
Yeah.
It's not where they should spend their money.
Yeah.
Fair.
So that'll be interesting. And then before we move on to the landing spots, we talked about, there are some running backs that are probably not good fits for their team anymore. Alvin Kamara comes to mind. Travis Etienne, maybe to a lesser extent. But there's also running backs that need extensions. We don't necessarily see running backs traded because they need extensions. That's more of a wide receiver thing. But Andrew, do we think any of these running backs that on these lists get traded this season, off season? Do we see a running back trade?
Well, I think Travis Etienne is the most obvious, just because it felt like the team didn't want him, and now they've changed coaches, and the new guy coming in there is going to try to gut replace everything. So I just feel like he's the odd man out. And even though he's got a ton of talent, I just think that he ends up getting traded. I worry, though, that wherever he goes is probably not going to be great for him. I just think that a lot of the other teams are seeing the writing on the wall, maybe not seeing the upside. That's another option where maybe the Bears can pull off a fourth round pick or something for him. Yeah, I'm thinking high here, but like maybe there's an option there where the Jaguars just want to get a pick for him and they don't care what it is. And maybe he lands there and kind of gives a little bit of, razzle dazzle to that Ben Johnson offense too. So I think Travis Etienne's probably the one that just feels like has that overstayed his welcome the most.
Yeah.
So that kind of feels like the easy answer. The other one that I'll go with, as in like, if we're going to see anybody get traded, I hesitate saying it because I don't think it's really going to happen. But in my head, Kyren Williams stands out as one of those because the Rams I don't know what they're doing right now.
Yeah,
right? Like they're talking about this whole Matt Stafford thing. I know. And they always trade away their picks. They don't ever have picks. They're not doing anything different this season, but maybe they're realizing, hey, that didn't work. That's not working. Maybe they need to get out of this. And Kyren might be the best running back available. We just looked at this long list of players that are kind of meh. I don't think Breece Hall gets traded. I don't think James Cook gets traded. Like none of the guys better than Kyren get moved anywhere. I don't think. So I think Kyren would be a crazy option, and I don't think it would happen because, again, Rams don't trade 4 picks, but it would be a wild thing to happen during free agency where they trade for another player or picks or something and then go pick up a Najee Harris and kind of, figure it out on their own. So those are the two that I'm looking at for like the sake of fantasy that could be really game changers.
Well, I love that. I'm going to actually go second here because I agree that it's ETN, but that also leads to the second trade that I think happens and the one that I want to happen the most. And that is Cohen going out and getting Rachaad White from the Buccaneers so that we can see full Bucky Irving next season and maybe a little bit of Sean Tucker, who I've been begging to see more
That's
of.
not a bad pick.
Exactly. So I agree. ETN goes, White in, and we get Bucky and Sean Tucker in Tampa Bay, which is the whole reason I've orchestrated this entire thing.
I'd be down for that. Yeah.
So, Josh, what do you see happening?
Hey, anything that gets Rachaad White out of Tampa.
Especially for you being in that area, you don't want to hear about the guy anymore.
I hate Rachaad White.
Yep.
It's the bane of my existence.
A lot of fantasy managers do too. Yeah.
It's awful. Anyway. No, I have a few. ETN, I think, definitely goes, and I really want to see him land with the Chargers. I think ETN's ability to score touchdowns would fit seamlessly in a Greg Roman offense. Now, on the flip side of that, it's going to absolutely sap ETN's pass catching ability. So you definitely got to hope for.
Yeah, they threw to the running back like 67 times this year or something like that.
Well, Dobbins ended up with 38 targets, surprisingly. Yeah. But no, the other one that, and I've been banging this drum, I actually think that the Jets should explore trading Breece Hall.
Oh,
because look, they're not close to competing. And if you have a young electric running back, especially after seeing the running back renaissance of 2024, tell me why, if you're the Kansas City Chiefs, you don't look at what Saquon Barkley did this year and said, what could Breece Hall do for us? And say, you know what? We don't need the 31st pick. We saw what spending a 32nd pick on Clyde Edwards-Helaire did for us. Let's maybe spend an earlier pick and get a better running back. Just throwing that out there. But I do think the dark horse being maybe Pacheco does get moved because, he didn't do shit after getting hurt, got basically replaced by a 30-year-old. And it's kind of like the shine has worn off of this 7th round pick, basically, is what I'm getting at. Yeah. And I think because of what he did over his first couple of years, there could be a team that, wouldn't mind, giving up a 5th round pick to get somebody that could potentially rush for 1,000 yards.
Yeah, I just wonder if the Chiefs are equating this to his injury and his comeback. I don't know if the Chiefs are.
I mean, it could be, sure, yeah. But again, like, you could very easily upgrade from Pacheco is what I'm getting at.
Yeah.
Whether it's via trade or this upcoming draft class.
What if there's a world where Pacheco and Breece Hall switch teams, right? Like maybe there's a thing where Pacheco and a pick go to New York for Breece, something like that.
Pacheco and 31 for Breece doesn't seem like the most outlandish trade. So.
Nope, not at all.
And again, the Jets would be fine with that. Even if you ultimately
have to pay Breece Hall, $12 million a year, that's still a bargain.
Yeah.
Yep.
Gabe Davis makes $13 million a year.
God, that's terrifying. Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
And everybody was mad about the Christian Kirk contract. It was the next year you needed to be worried about.
Right? Little did they know, yeah.
Yeah. All right. Now to what is potentially the most boring spot of the show as we get to the wrap-up section. It is time for landing spots. Who is going to land where? We're looking at the teams that have the biggest need that we mentioned at the beginning of the show. Andrew, I'm going to come to you first on all of these. So let's start with the Las Vegas Raiders. Who do you think ends up in Las Vegas?
Well, my answer before the show started was Aaron Jones, but Josh is really turning me around here.
He did this to me last week.
Yeah. I like your logic here, Josh, and I got to go with Javonte there. I just feel like Javonte probably makes the most fit. I think he's got the most time left on those legs, and you're not kidding. Pete Carroll loves himself a good running back, and Javonte fits a lot of that mold. A young kid, still got a lot of life left. That kind of works for me. So I'm kind of leaning Javonte now more than Aaron Jones, which I was before.
Josh, cosign?
Yeah, it's Javonte. I mean, I've beat this drum all show, so I'm not going to elaborate.
I was going to laugh if you were like, well, Andrew convinced me, and I think you're good.
Well, I'll go different.
I didn't.
They have the most money to spend. I'm going to say it's Najee Harris going to the Raiders. I think he also fits the mold of something Pete Carroll might be looking for. And I think that's where Najee Harris ends up as probably the premier running back from this class, unless you're Pete Prisco. And then Rico Dowdle ends up there. Speaking of Rico Dowdle, we got the Dallas Cowboys, Andrew.
Rico Dowdle. I think that's where he stays. I think you teed that up perfectly. I just think that, I mean, again, that we've seen Jerry Jones go back to the well a couple of times, and he really likes his guys. And, he went back and got Zeke again. I think he gives Rico Dowdle another chance, but they also sign someone else or draft someone else. And Dowdle is not as fantasy relevant as he was last year. So even if Pete Prisco thinks I'm an idiot, I'm fine with that.
Do you have an idea of who they might sign? Because I actually have them signing Dowdle and another guy as well. I just want to see.
If I was going to pick a second option, it would probably be like a Cam Akers or somebody stupid. You know what I mean? Like no offense to Cam Akers. I'm not saying he's stupid, but I mean, like that would be a dumb thing to do. And that just fits for Jerry Jones. If they don't get somebody splashy in the draft and Cam Akers might still be on the couch come, May, then maybe they add Cam Akers or something like that after the draft if they miss. But I honestly think they go Rico Dowdle and draft somebody.
Yeah, Cam Akers might not be stupid, but his Achilles tendon is stupid.
Yes, both of them, I think, actually, right?
Yeah, exactly. Josh, who do you got landing in with Dallas?
I think Dowdle ends up going back there, and I think that they'll probably draft somebody. Now, if they do end up signing 2 running backs, I think Dowdle and Khalil Herbert would be the options there. Because I think Khalil Herbert has done next to nothing to actually warrant bigger than like a $1.5 million deal plus incentives. And that is a bargain that the Cowboys will make because they've got their own people that they need to re-sign, and they got to figure out how to extend Micah Parsons before he becomes a Philadelphia Eagle.
Yep.
Well, wait, mentioning Khalil Herbert, I do want to tag this in. I think the Bengals keep Khalil Herbert. I think that they get rid of Zach Moss because that was a terrible choice, and they just hold on to Herbert. Herbert didn't need to play much down the stretch, but they did trade a pick for him. And it's kind of like, that pot committed. The Bengals tend to play a lot of this like we do in fantasy, where they're like, well, I don't know. I mean, we gave up a pick. I mean, we'd still have that pick, and we and they would think about it like a value. So I think
that's a Mike Brown thought process if I've ever heard one before. You're absolutely right. Surprise, surprise. I agree with my showmates here. I do have Dowdle re-signing, but I actually, because I said Dallas is likely to make a splash, this is where I have Javonte Williams going. I think Dowdle and Javonte Williams forming the 1-2 punch, and Dallas with Javonte kind of being, maybe the 1B of the premier running backs available. Andrew, we move on.
We saw Javonte excel at North Carolina with a running mate.
Exactly.
I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibilities that, Williams ends up in another committee but actually works well for him if a team is actually committed to running the football.
Yeah, I mean, Rico Dowdle knows the offense there, and it's kind of, the old and the new, and maybe it works out well for Dallas. It probably doesn't, but it might. Andrew, how do you have the Denver Broncos playing out the running back position this offseason?
I feel like, with the loss of Javonte, which I think we all agree Javonte's out of there just because it doesn't seem like they want him to stay. And I don't know why he would, unless they pay him a god awful amount of money to do nothing, which makes even less sense to me. I think that they kind of let Jaleel McLaughlin have this year. I think that he did enough last year to earn it. And I think he ends up getting it, but I do think they signed somebody to back him up. I wouldn't be shocked if it's somebody like a Gainwell or P. Ryan, one of those guys that we've seen kind of be a journeyman third down back. Someone who can come in and kind of pick up a drive here and there. So I wouldn't be at all surprised to see somebody like that. I would be very surprised to see somebody like Nick Chubb land there or Jalen Warren, something like. I just don't see that being how they tend to do things. And I mean, I would love it too, and it would be hilarious if Peyton went and traded for Kamara somehow.
Ah, you bastard! That was my
bringing them all back. But
don't kill me on this. This is what I was gonna say. No, Andrew,
go for it then.
There's actually a running thing on this show. I follow coaching trends, and so obviously I was gonna put Kamara back.
Like, how many former Saints does he have on this team? Like, it would not be out of the realm of possibilities at all.
Yeah,
even ones that didn't play for him. When the Saints cut my boy A.T. Perry, he immediately went to the Denver Broncos.
He's like, yeah, I had A.T. Perry. He wasn't there when I was there. Close enough. Whatever.
Yeah, exactly. It's 6 degrees of separation.
Yeah.
Whatever. What did Josh say last week? 6 degrees of 7 or whatever.
7 bacon.
7 bacon. Yeah.
6 degrees of Kevin Bacon.
The greatest thing ever. Josh, how do you have the Broncos playing? As I mentioned, I was dreaming here, and I said they trade for Kamara. Obviously, Andrew does not like that dream. Josh,
well, I just don't.
I mean, I can see it. I'm curious what the cap ramifications would be because Kamara just signed an extension. Obviously, I feel like he wants to finish his career in New Orleans, but we know, the links there with Sean Payton, and obviously the Broncos are a hell of a lot closer to getting to the playoffs than the Saints are. So I don't know. It'll be interesting, especially with the cap situation with New Orleans. But with the Broncos, first off, Andrew, if you think that they're going to give a 165-pound running back a chance to be the number one, bro, I want what you're smoking up there. Like,
no.
It's not me. It's just I think it's like I'm double thinking it, right? That's not what I would do. That's what I think they do, because I think isn't it called like the fallacy of rational coaching, right?
Yes.
Like we think about this all the time. Like it makes no sense to do that. They won't do it, and then they do it every year. It happens where there's dumb stuff that goes down, and that's why I'm saying I think Peyton's like, well, let's let Jaleel figure it out, and I'm like,
They got Audric
and then he's broken in half after 3 games. For, 15 carries. But no, I mean, Peyton wants to run
right? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, Peyton wants to run a committee. He's already come out and said it.
Always.
I think the Broncos ultimately go to the draft. I mean, say what you will about Estime last year. I mean, we've seen rookies not really do great year 1 and then, shine in year 2 or maybe in year 3, right? Maybe year 4. Look at Rico Dowdle, right? So, it's not out of the realm of possibility that Estime can still become something, but this draft class is just way too deep for the Broncos to be like, let's go blow money in free agency on a position that we're obviously going to create a committee out of. So
yep. I think that's fair. Let's just keep it pushing through. The Pittsburgh Steelers. I feel like a lot of us, if not all 3 of us, agree Jalen Warren ends up staying with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
I think so. Yeah.
I wanted to throw a monkey wrench in here. I think it would be hilarious, and I think it's actually altogether possible. If Najee leaves, I would not be surprised to see Nick Chubb stay in division to go at the Browns with the Pittsburgh Steelers.
That's not a bad pick. Yeah, that's not a bad pick.
As a partner with Jalen Warren. Yeah. So, it's not a far drive. Exactly.
Quick, easy.
I don't know. Towards the end of the year, Nick Chubb looked like.
Well, that's what I'm saying. He's not going. He's not going there to be the starter, man.
Definitely not. I mean, he could be a goal line hammer.
I mean,
but
as a Bengals fan, I hope so. I guess, that would be great. But no, I think it's Warren, and I like the idea of Chubb. That's not a bad idea.
Yep. Looking at
Browns fans would absolutely hate that idea.
Yeah. Oh, exactly. And that's exactly.
Browns fans need all the goodwill they can get if Nick Chubb were to go to the hated Steelers. Oh my God. I'm fairly certain they would burn that stadium down if that happened.
It would be,
especially after all the Deshaun Watson crap.
Maybe I'm just here for the LOLs at this point.
Oh, dude, you are the fucking meme, like sitting in the fire, just being like, "Yep, it's fine. Let's go, chaos, baby." Like,
anybody have anything to add on Dobbins staying to the Chargers?
I mean, I think Najee stays there. But
you think Najee ends up there?
Stays in
Pittsburgh. He stays in Pittsburgh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and I think Dobbins stays in.
Yeah, I was gonna say I think we've all been pretty clear about that. So let's just take a look at that because we all kind of said the Chargers are easily the best landing spot. Obviously, Dobbins wouldn't be switching teams. Is a healthy Dobbins a top 12 back next year, Andrew?
I don't think so because I don't think a healthy Dobbins exists. So I mean, part of me thinks that he's probably going to be a top 20 running back. He's one of those guys that you might put him in your flex as your third running back and be excited about it just because you're like, oh, that's not bad. But I think he's too fragile to really get that top 12 moniker. I don't think he's going to make it all season. Again, I was saying earlier, I think he's got enough tread on the tires. I think he's going to be fine. I think the Chargers liked him. None of that says he's going to play all 17 games. Like I don't think that's happening anyway. But I think that the Chargers liked him and used him when they didn't really need to. And that to me says they want him. I think he wants to be there. I think he had a good season. If you look back at overall in his year, I don't think he was upset at the management. I think they gave him a chance and he showed it. Like, I think
Absolutely.
he stays.
I agree with everything. I have nothing to add there. Josh, what do you have happening?
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead.
Well, yeah, I think Dobbins stays there, but again, like this is going to be another team. Like this draft is so deep. Like get a young guy into this system, and
100%.
I was going to say that. We're
but I mean, like I'll reference Daniel Jeremiah's recent mock draft on NFL.com. Like he actually has 3 running backs going in the first round.
Wow.
Yeah. So
I could see it.
One of them, Omarion Hampton from UNC, going to the Chargers.
Okay.
So again, like I don't think that any running back outside of Genty deserves to go in the first round, just me personally. But again, I think when you look at the depth of this class and you look at some of these teams that have really good rushing offenses, and then you look at how many running backs really elevated their offenses in 2024, this is a copycat league. Teams are going to look at that and say, well, you know what? Our scheme works really fucking well too. Let's see what can happen when we put a really good running back in this situation. And I think that could very well push some of these top end running backs into that late first round for some of these, playoff teams that might need that extra lift.
Yep. And I was going to say, with the deepness of this running back class, every one of these teams is likely to end up with a rookie as well. Yep. It just wouldn't make sense if they didn't. Josh, how do you have the Vikings playing out?
I think Aaron Jones stays. I'll reference Daniel Jeremiah's draft. He has Travion Henderson from Ohio State landing there, which honestly, he may as well be an Aaron Jones clone.
Is that the third? Is that the third first round pick you were referencing from? Okay, I was wondering about that.
Yeah, so it was Genty, Hampton, and then Henderson. So, which again, I don't think the Vikings will spend a first round pick on a running back, but I mean, if they bring back Aaron Jones, to me, it's going to be on a 1-year deal. Like he's going to be 31 at the, I believe, either the start of the season or in the middle of the season.
Yeah,
like he just had his first 1,000-yard season since 2022. But he has 5 of his last 6 years. He's had over 60 catches. Yeah, that's Travion Henderson's game. Like that is Aaron Jones, right? So I think if you're drafting somebody like Henderson to kind of pass the baton, not a bad idea.
I say it's almost like a Kyron Williams, Blake Corum situation, except Aaron Jones is ready to pass the torch where Kyron Williams may not be. And then Andrew, we're gonna close out the show, at least this section of the show, this final section, with the rival Cleveland Browns. What do you have them doing at the running back spot?
Well, so Browns for me is a perfect pivot to your final question, which is which one do you most want to see?
Okay,
I just wrote this up too. Jerome Ford takes that over and is a potentially top 12 running back in Cleveland because I don't think they have the offensive weapons other than that. I don't think they go out and get anything else. I think they have too many needs and they're too chaotic and their cap is crazy. I think Jerome Ford ends up being like a sleeper pick for a top 12 running back season, just because I think he's got the longevity, and in top 12, you have to play every game pretty much.
There you go.
So I just think he's one of those few guys left that would be a bell cow if Chubb leaves, which I think he does. So for me, the Browns, it's Jerome Ford and none of these free agents and probably none of the rookies either, to be honest. I mean, there's a chance obviously because it's so deep, but I think that they saw what they needed out of Jerome Ford last year. And they're just like, we have so many other pieces of this building falling apart. I don't think they need to worry about running back right now.
Josh? Browns?
I think they'll probably end up doing the same thing that they did when they drafted Ford, spend like a 4th, 5th, 6th round running back on somebody, or 4th, 5th round pick on a running back to pair with him. But I ultimately think they do re-sign Chubb. I think that they've had way too much bad publicity, And Nick Chubb is like an A+++ individual.
He's like a palate cleanser for that city.
Exactly, right? Like, and now you're
point.
getting him, quote, healthy at the beginning of the season, not like towards the tail end of the season. He'll have a full offseason to kind of work back into game shape. And like I said, I mean, he looked pretty toast towards the end of the season. But, I mean, if there's any running back not to bet on or, not to fade, it's Nick Chubb. And
always,
I don't have an issue with that, but I can also see him leaving because he wants a chance to play for a contender. But again, I just think that they can't afford to lose a locker room presence like him, especially with this Deshaun Watson thing still hanging over this team.
Yeah, I had them losing Chubb and obviously Chubb going to Pittsburgh. So I think they go boring with the backup, and I was trying to think of who they might go. I think this is a team where like Cam Akers or Alexander Mattison ends up where it's just somebody to back up Jerome Ford, somebody who's not going to threaten Ford, because I agree with Andrew. I want to see Ford there. And Andrew kind of already touched on. My last question to wrap up the show was, what player landing spot combo are you most looking forward to? Andrew said Jerome Ford in Cleveland. Josh, who do you got?
I picked two. So one for free agency, Javonte in Las Vegas. I will harp on this. I think that is a perfect pairing, and I think it could be so great for so many parties involved. But I took a swing at a trade, and I mentioned it a little earlier in the show. I think the Chiefs need to call the Jets and make a run at
themselves. That's a crazy one.
I really like that one.
That blows away what I'm going to say.
I just you look at some of the great running backs that Andy Reid has had, and Breece Hall's ability as not only a runner, but also a pass catcher. He'll have the second coming. He could potentially have a better version of Jamal Charles.
Yeah. That'd be crazy. For me, Josh actually inspired mine at the beginning of the show because I knew I wanted someone to go to the Chargers. And Josh said, is Najee Harris not just the most boring 1,000-yard rusher ever? And I said, what offense could do with super boring running back? And if that's not John Harbaugh and Greg Roman's offense, I don't know what is. So for fantasy, give me Najee in Los Angeles. Guys, that is the running back free agency show. Andrew, let everybody know where they can find your work, what you're working on, where they should be following you.
Yeah, so you can find me at Andrew Hull FF on Blue Sky and Twitter. I do still write for Fantasy Pros. I just put out that article you mentioned, and I got some more stuff coming this off season, primarily dynasty focused. Just kind of getting into the weeds of the dynasty off season, or as the non-point scoring season, as we tend to call it. But again, thanks so much for having me on. This was a great time. Even though the running back free agency class is a little bit lackluster, it's still a fun time to just throw some ideas out there. And look, Josh taught me something.
Wait till we get to tight ends.
So yeah, I like it. Yeah, tight ends will be very fun. I'm glad I'm not doing that.
I was gonna say, you're a great guest, Andrew, when you could take a boring show and we all had a blast. So thank you, Andrew, for coming in when we could not find a guest for the longest time. And Josh put it on me, and you answered the call right away. So we very much appreciate it. Guys, I'm just going to go ahead and wrap up the show. We're already over an hour. We are going to be covering wide receivers next week. We're not 100% who the guest is, but his name might be Andrew as well. We're going to see if we can make that work. For Josh, I'm Ryan. Make sure you're following Club Fantasy on all the socials at Club Fantasy FFL. We also have started a Discord. If you guys are interested, shoot a DM over to us on Twitter and we'll get you guys invited to the Discord. It's a great time we're having in there. We're even talking fantasy baseball. Austin Amendolia has us talking fantasy baseball in the Club Fantasy Discord. It's a great time. We'd love to have you. Always remember, defense wins championships, offense wins fantasy football, and we will see you guys next week for the free agent wide receivers. Have a good night.